Welcome back to the study. We are finishing Mark chapter 4 after many, many sessions in it. And they've been good ones. We've learned a lot from this chapter. Remember, the Bible was not originally written in chapters and verse. Those didn't come along until several centuries later. So when we hack it up with verses and with chapters, it isn't really contextually perfect. It helps us understand it in segments easier. It helps us digest it spiritually by saying, Jesus said in such and such a book, chapter such and such a verse, this is what happened, those type of things. So remember, those barriers that we've created in verse and chapter sometimes are a hindrance and sometimes are very good. Like in this particular situation, it sets this particular incident in the story of the Gospel of Mark off very separately so we can hear it. He's been, again, teaching in parables all day. We pick up in verse 35. He says, on that day, the day that he had been teaching these parables in Mark 4, when evening came, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. And that's the other side of the lake of the Sea of Galilee. Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in a boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush, be still. And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? They became very much afraid and said to one another, who is this, that even the wind and sea obey him? You have to take the whole concept of Mark from 1:1 until right here where we get up to 4:41 and realize that these disciples had spent a fair amount of time with Christ. They had been called to be his apostles out of the group of disciples. They were getting special time away with Jesus. They were at Jesus' seminary, as we talked about last session. They were learning about Christ. Now, they had seen him do many miracles. They had heard him say things to people that, it's like, whoa, where did he come up with that one at? They were astonished by his wisdom, as were the Pharisees and scribes and anybody else around him. He taught with authority the kingdom of God, which was not a safe thing to talk about in the Roman Empire, especially if there were many Romans around, Roman soldiers especially. They would look at that and say, no, that's absolutely wrong. We are that kingdom. And so he was a very, very outstanding person within his local community. We remember how he got himself in trouble, and basically his mother and sisters and brothers came and said, hey, come on, let's go. Let's get out of here. Let's go home. But all of these things that they had experienced to this point were interactive with people. Sure, he had done some miracles. Sure, he had healed some people in front of them. They saw the miraculous, but it was interactive with people. It was definitely authoritatively powerful in the culture and the society. It never dealt with nature in the, shall we say, direct cosmological sense of the word. Now, he does. And here's the interesting thing. The disciples, or the apostles here, are in the boat, a couple boats, trying to cross the Sea of Galilee. And of course, it was very common for these little storms to come up. It's a very flat sea, and so when the wind comes down the bowl of this, where the Sea of Galilee is, it can really get to swirling and beating people up. And they got in the middle of one of these gales, one of these windy, rainy storms. And of course, the waves start blowing, and there's filling the boat up. Now, Jesus is laying down, and he's asleep while all of this is going on. This shows you the evidence of the peace of God in somebody's life, because none of us would be asleep, and none of them were asleep. And of course, they go and give Jesus the wake-up call. Don't you care? What, can't you see what we're going through? And they're waking Jesus up, thinking Jesus is asleep at the, he doesn't get it. We're drowning, and he's taking a nap. I think sometimes that's the way we feel about God. We get into really bad circumstances, situations. It seems like God's not responding, and we're going, "Are you asleep? Come on, wake up!" And we try to give God the wake-up call. What's funny is he turns it all around, and he stands up. Once they wake him up, he stands up, and that peace, be still, hush, be still, as we see it in this particular translation. And everything in nature calms down. Everything becomes peaceful when Jesus speaks. That's really neat to meditate on. That when Jesus speaks, there is peace. It may not be the initial output of his speaking, but when Jesus speaks, if we hear the depth of his spiritual language, he brings peace. What's funny here is then Jesus turns the wake-up call around on them and kind of wakes them up. And he says to them, why are you afraid? In other words, you should know me by now. Hello, wake up. Do you still have any faith? Is it still that you just don't have any faith? What's going on? Hello, wake up. And I can only imagine these guys are standing there going, oh my goodness. Yeah, we've seen him do all this stuff with people and with authorities and in situations and circumstances and talk his way and punch his way out of a paper bag and all that stuff, as we would say today. But wow, man, he dealt with what nobody deals with. The wind, the sea, the forces of nature. And when he spoke, it was over. Now, this scared them. Ironically, I don't know that it increased their faith at this point. It may have to a certain point. But it says they were very much afraid. They didn't know how to handle this. Jesus gives them the wake-up call after they give him the wake-up call. And so many times he does that to us. We try to wake God up, and Jesus says, whoa, where are you at? Wake up. Hello? And the disciples say, this guy can deal with things we can't deal with. I am sure that started a process in their lives by which they started realizing they were in the very presence of God incarnate. And that's where the change really probably started in their lives. There was a lot of guys out there doing miracles in Jesus' day. We read it historically in secular writings and non-canonical writings. But this one was the cooker. This one was the one that put the cookies in the oven, shall we say. And when they tried to wake Jesus up, Jesus really ended up waking them up. And that's where this story really has its depth.